Why, hello there. Brent here with Bring Your Own Tools. On today's episode, if you want to see how we completely transform this area from this to this, well, keep on watching. Let's get started.
Everyone's backyard is slightly different, and even if you don't have this exact scenario at your location, just know the general principles of retaining wall are basically going to be the same whether you're building a 1 foot high retaining wall or something much larger. This might be a small retaining wall, but there's still plenty of prep work involved with something like this to make sure we have proper drainage long term for decades. We have our block, we have our top cap, let's get to prep. Our first step in the prep work is to account for the layout. The retaining wall block that I'm using is approximately 6 inches deep, and I want at least 10 inches of crushed rock behind the wall, as well as some general space for drainage in the front of it. So I place metal stakes at 22 inches from our concrete patio, and that way I'm able to string line that line all the way across. This will give us a perfect way to determine exactly where we need to excavate to, which makes life a lot easier. Now that we have our layout determined, it's time for excavation. I do want to remove all the grass, but I want to save the grass because we're going to be using this to fill in this dead space behind our retaining wall. In order to make it a lot easier to reinstall the grass, I just placed these grass patches right behind the retaining wall that we're going to be building. That way, once it becomes time to reinstall, we can just place it right back in the area that I found it, at least in theory, of course. I find this very easy to do with a narrow flathead shovel, and I go down about 4 inches for grass removal in order to not damage the root system. Now that we have the grass carefully removed, it's time for excavation. Now I want to go down at least 6 inches below the top of our concrete pad. This accounts for a couple different things. Number one, we want to make sure we have at least 4 inches of crushed rock underneath our retaining wall block. And two, I actually want to bury that first stone. Now you don't have to do this every single time, especially for a wall this small, but generally speaking, you want to bury the first retaining wall layer within compacted rock or soil. That will solidify that wall itself and make sure that that first row doesn't move on you over time. We're taking this project on during the dead of summer, and this soil was extremely dry and extremely tough to get even a shovel through it. Therefore, I had to go the rotary route, and this is a rotary hammer that I used to break up the soil first, which made it a lot easier to shovel. It's basically a mini jackhammer, and I actually use it normally for demolition projects in a tiled bathroom. But as you can see, it also works very well with extremely stiff dirt. One unique caveat about this project is the fact that we do have a downspout drain going directly into this area, as well as a second downspout drain that's located underneath our concrete patio. Hopefully you don't have to deal with this scenario on your project because it is a bit of a unique one, but this is how I solved it, which was basically giving the water an area for it to drain to. The existing drainage system underneath the concrete slab was a rigid drain system, and therefore, to accommodate the same type of system, I put a T on this end and then make sure we're capturing the moisture from the second downspout. I measured the length needed and then go to my longer 10-foot long sections and cut those pieces accordingly. This stuff is extremely easy to cut, and I'm not even using glue for these installations because later on, if this hose ever needs to be removed and replaced, they can always do so with ease. As you can see, these pipes have holes, and that's for proper drainage. That basically means that once these pipes fill up, or as they fill up, it will be dispersing the water more gradually versus all of a sudden rushing to the soil, potentially disturbing your retaining wall. I'd also like to note that if this was a much larger retaining wall where I was more concerned about moisture, I'd actually have these pipes as a solid pipe and having all the water being transferred to a much larger catch basin. But since our pipe in this case does have holes, we don't want it to be filled with rock or dirt. Therefore, a drainage sleeve comes in extremely handy by rolling that onto the pipe itself and then making sure we tie off both ends. These sleeves are extremely easy to roll onto the pipe, just make sure you cut the holes for wherever you have connections. Once you have your holes accounted for, you're ready for installation. But before we actually apply this tubing, we need to get to our woven fabric. Now this is going to be a barrier between our soil and our rock. And this is a very important step when it comes to a foundation because I don't want any of the soil mixing in with our rock. This is a heavy-duty polyurethane woven fabric, which means that it's extremely durable, but it also lets water naturally pass through it because it's woven and not a full piece of plastic. I easily slip the drainage tube into position, and now we can finally get to our rock. Specifically, our 5/8 crushed minus, and this means that the majority of this rock is 5/8 inch or less, but the real kicker is that it has a minus, and that basically means it has more of a rock dust particle to it, and therefore it's perfect for compaction. I'll be showing you another product that is very similar, but it doesn't have the minus, and therefore it doesn't compact as nicely. With a simple shovel, wheelbarrow, and rake, you're easily able to disperse all this material evenly in a nice level fashion. Now it doesn't have to be perfectly level, but you want to get it fairly close to level at this point because that will make life easier in the long run. Once we have our base rock dispersed in our trench, I then grab my laser level and determine if the base product is actually at the same height all the way across. If you don't have a laser level, you can always just grab a normal level and place it on the ground to see how level that ground actually is, but this makes it extremely easy to go all the way down and determine whether you have any drastic high or low spots. I want to see it within a ½ inch. Our rock base height is close enough, and therefore we can get to compacting. I'm using a narrow plate compactor with a water jug on the front, which disperses water as I'm going down the line. This makes the compacting process extremely quick and easy, and it's very vital to have a properly compacted base before you start installing any of your retaining wall block. I go over all areas at least 3 times, and once I feel it's fully compacted, we can finally start installing our retaining wall block. Before I install anything, I do grab my 6-foot level just to guarantee that we have a level base to start out with, and once I can get to that point, we start positioning our first layer of block. This is a very straightforward retaining wall, which basically means we have one 90-degree angle, and that's it. You do want to double check for multiple directions of levelness, but once you actually like the positioning of the first couple, it gets a lot easier to align the following block. Once I have my corner blocks in position and taken care of, I then stake metal stakes at both ends of a retaining wall. That way I'm able to actually use that string line again and determine exactly where every single block needs to be placed to be in a perfect alignment. It's great to have the adjacent block a little bit higher than the one that you have leveled previously, because that way you can actually pound it down into position, and I'm using a rubber mallet to pound each retaining wall block into proper levelness. Be mindful of the fact that each block can have a high or low spot, so you're going to have to get down low to make sure that that level is actually truly level and placed right on top of each retaining wall block. One way I sped up this process was actually taking my string line and bringing it up to the very top of our block. That way I know for certain that it's going to be at least close to level as I move down the line. I still have my 6-foot level with me at all times because I still want to guarantee levelness, but the string line does help the process move much faster. And in case you were wondering, this product is manufactured from Bellegarde, and I purchased it through Lowe's. I'll make sure and leave a link in the description box below if you want to purchase this product or any of the other products seen in this video.
Okay, we got the first row in, looking good. Everything's leveled up. Now, let's get to the second row.
In order to guarantee ourselves that these blocks will stay connected for years and years to come, we gotta use an adhesive, and for that, you want a product that's specifically designed for retaining wall block, and that's exactly what this product is. It's from Loctite, and it's their landscape adhesive. I applied 2 thick beads across each landscape block, and the reason why it's such a great product to use in these applications is the fact that it can be applied to exterior block and brick whether it's wet or dry, and it doesn't become brittle over time, which is a big deal especially with exterior adhesives because it's going to get a lot of moisture and heat. Now that we're building upon this wall and it's becoming a true retaining wall, I wanted to note one thing. You don't want to use this type of block for a very tall retaining wall. I'd keep these retaining walls under 2 feet because these blocks don't have any type of interlocking back corner connection. And that is really important, especially when considering very tall retaining walls. If you're looking for tall retaining wall blocks, I'll make sure and leave a link in the description box below, but just know keep this type of system under 2 feet. But just because this retaining wall isn't very tall doesn't mean that it doesn't deserve a top cap. I picked up a top cap for this system that's a very similar product but a slightly different shade of gray. Plus keep in mind that these blocks are only 12 inches long versus the other blocks are 16 inches long. I grab my tape measure as I'm installing the first couple and making sure that the spacing on the back side and the front side are almost identical. I prefer that look, and having an even 1 inch on both sides versus 2 inches on one side just seems to look better. Just as before, 2 thick beads of adhesive is all you need for the installation and the adhesive aspect, but the one key element when installing this product is to make sure everything is straight, and that's where my 6-foot level comes into play because I just run that across the side of the bricks and making sure that every single one aligns perfectly. I do suggest looking down the row occasionally just to make sure that everything actually looks straight and you're not all of a sudden veering off to one side, but as long as you did your homework and your due diligence earlier, this system should line up properly. With most retaining walls, you're not going to be able to finish it off with one perfect piece, but luckily for us, all you need to get the perfect piece is a circular saw and the right blade. This is a diamond blade and specifically designed for masonry. I take my measurement, make my mark, and use my speed squared as a guide for my circular saw to cut a very nice straight cut. Just make sure when you're doing this that you have the proper respirator, eye protection, and ear protection. I did have to cut this section 3 times to make sure it came out smoothly and evenly, but with the right saw blade, it cut through like butter. It fit in perfectly the very first time, of course. I just had to give it a few love taps to make sure it was in the proper alignment. Once I double checked it with the level and knew positioning was correct, I then applied my adhesive and the second layer of stone. Then of course cutting the top cap to the appropriate size and positioning that as well. I let our adhesive dry overnight and came back to it the next day with a drainage hose. This is a corrugated drain pipe with sleeve already installed. You want to make sure and install this behind your retaining wall even if it's a small retaining wall like this because water pressure can build up on a system even this small. This disperses the water and the moisture evenly across the entire area and really helps with proper drainage. But speaking of drainage, we need some drainage rock. This is 3/4 to 1/4 inch rock, and it's perfect for a system like this because water is easily able to drain through it, but all the fine materials are washed out of it, unlike the previous rock that I used, which is perfect for compaction. This is very good at compaction, but not as good as the one that we used previously, but it's a lot better at draining moisture, which of course is why we use it in this application. I fill the majority of the cavity behind the retaining wall, but leave about an inch below our cap. That's because we need to improve the look behind our retaining wall by reinstalling our grass. I fold the woven fabric onto our rock that we just poured and then apply some dirt to the area. Then after that, I apply the grass, and that way we have a physical barrier between our grass and the rock that we just poured. I work my way down the line trying to install the grass in somewhat of a cohesive fashion. Now it's not going to look perfect because we're using existing grass and this grass doesn't look great to begin with, but it's going to look much better and natural once we're out of the dry summer months. Once I had all the grass reinstalled, I went over the entire area with a plate compactor which not only compacts the dirt in the grass, but it also compacts the rock underneath. I went over this area approximately 3 or 4 times, and once I felt it was at full compaction, I proceeded to work on our final step, the decorative rock in between our concrete patio and our new retaining wall. I had some extra crushed rock readily available which I installed, however, I quickly realized we wanted a bit of a different look, which is why I went out and bought some smooth river rock, which really did do a nice job of complementing the area. This product will also be perfect for drainage and low maintenance, which is a win-win in my book. But after I go down this entire area and fill this cavity, we are done. I absolutely love how this retaining wall turned out. There was a lot of work that went into this small little wall, but it's so vital and important to take on those steps, especially if you want a wall to last for a long time. And as you can see, this amazing transformation is truly one beautiful, sexy beast. Oh yeah.